How to properly test for an Epstein-Barr virus. This is a topic I feel like really needs more understanding because oftentimes people will say, oh, I went to my doctor and they took my labs and they told me it's just a past infection. When in fact, it could be a chronic infection. So I'm going to teach you not only what you need to properly have your Epstein-Barr tested, but what each of those values mean so that you know, is it a past infection? Is it a chronic infection? Are you in a current flare or are you potentially in an acute infection? You can get all of that information from a simple blood test if you're pulling the right values and you know the right way to look at them. So if you've had your Epstein-Barr labs tested before, pull them out and follow along with me. If you haven't had them done yet, I'm going to teach you exactly what to ask for to get your labs done. So it starts with this. Number one, you need to pull all 4 antibodies for Epstein-Barr. Now, the test is through a blood draw, right? So you're going to get your blood drawn, and there's 4 different antibodies. It needs to include your VCA IgM, your VCA IgG, your nuclear antigen, which is also called the EBNA, and your early antigen. You need all 4 in order to know what phase of Epstein-Barr you're in. Now, one of the things I see way too often is people will say, oh yeah, I had my Epstein-Barr tested, and they'll send me over their labs to look at, and the doctor only pulled 3, and they forgot to pull the early antigen. For me, right away, that's a red flag that doctor doesn't understand chronic Epstein-Barr. If they didn't even pull your early antigen, that is not the person that you want to be taking advice from. You need that early antigen value. So if you don't have all 4 of them, you have incomplete labs. You really need that 4th value to determine, is it a past infection? Are you in a flare? Or is it an acute infection? So all 4 are mandatory. And you also have to make sure that you are asking for your labs to be quantitative, not qualitative. That means if you get your labs back and it just says VCA IgG positive, VCA IgM negative, and all you're getting is a positive and a negative, you don't have enough information to actually make a determination about your Epstein-Barr. We need the actual numbers, and that is what the quantitative labs will look for. We need to know those numbers. In addition to that, I've looked at thousands of Epstein-Barr labs. We also want to make sure the quantitative number goes as high as possible. For some labs, if you don't ask for them or you don't ask your doctor to test for wider ranges, they'll stop counting at the number 8. That is not enough information. You'll learn as I teach you what each of those values mean. We need it to go as high as possible, usually up to 600. Some labs go up to 750. The higher, the better, because it really will tell us how heavy your viral load is. So that's the 101, that's the basics. It's a blood draw. You need to make sure you're getting all 4 of those values pulled, and you need to make sure you're getting the number, not just positive and negative, and the number that goes up as high as that lab can go for you. That's going to give us the information we need to figure out where you're at with your Epstein-Barr. So once you have those, let me teach you what each of those mean. So the first one is your VCA, it's your IgM. Think M like mono, right? So in the acute form, Epstein-Barr is the virus that causes mono. IgM is positive when you have an acute infection. And for most people, it's the first time they get exposed to it. You have mono, your IgM goes positive. That means you're in an acute infection, right? You're contagious, you have mono, maybe your throat hurts, your lymph nodes are swollen. That's that infection. That's also the infection that most traditional doctors are the most interested in knowing if you have it or not, because for them, right, you have an active viral infection, you're contagious, your spleen might be enlarged. They are most interested in that number, right? Now, some people never even know they ever had mono before, and you could still have a chronic Epstein-Barr infection. That was my case. But if yours comes back positive for IgM, it does mean you actually have mono right now. But I will tell you, it is not the IgM, it is not having mono that is actually linked to all the chronic health issues that Epstein-Barr is known for. Things like autoimmune, dysautonomia, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, all of those have been linked to a chronic Epstein-Barr, but not when you're in the IgM state, which is what most doctors are looking for. So if you are in the IgM state, you still want to support it appropriately, but that's actually not the one that makes the most long-term issues. So even if your IgM is negative, that doesn't mean that your Epstein-Barr is not currently causing your symptoms. The next 3 values are what really give us that information. So the next one is your VCA IgG. Now, this is the value that most people consider the past infection, right? It starts going up a couple of weeks to months after the first time you've been exposed to Epstein-Barr. And that's the one telling us, yes, you have had this in the past. But here's the difference. Some people can have their exposure to Epstein-Barr. Actually, 95% of us have been exposed to Epstein-Barr, right? That's not rare. But most people can be exposed. Their body fights it off appropriately. It weakens the virus. It puts it in the dormant phase, and it never causes a problem again. Those people will have a positive VCA IgG, but it will be a relatively low number. So what I'm looking for in that number is how high is your viral load? Because there is a very big difference from somebody whose IgG is 50 to someone whose IgG is 600. And we're talking viral load. The higher that number is, it means the virus continues to replicate in your cells and is causing more strain on your immune system and your nervous system. So most people say if that number, and the research backs this up, is over 150, then you are actually more of a chronic infection than just a past infection, okay? So the IgG, if it's positive, past infection. If it stays relatively low, 100 or under, you're probably just a past infection. But if that number is creeping up, and for some of you it's very, very high, now we're looking at heavy viral load and the potential of a chronic Epstein-Barr infection. So now we look to the next two numbers to see, okay, this number is high, right? We're thinking maybe it's a chronic infection. What more can we gather from this? The next one is going to be your nuclear antigen, which is your EBNA. This is actually the value that is most linked to autoimmune, to neural inflammation, things like brain fog, memory issues, mood issues, where it's really highly tied to inflammation in the brain, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. And again, most doctors will say that the nuclear antigen, the EBNA, is a sign of a past infection. And that's true, right? It does actually climb months after your initial exposure. So normally when you first have mono, this one is not positive yet. It continues to climb over time. But what it's really telling us, again, just like the IgG, the higher your number is, the bigger problem you have. Because what EBNA does, the nuclear antigen, is it continues to elevate every time it sees the viral DNA. Which means if that is a really high number, your body is constantly being exposed to that virus. Your immune system is seeing it and it's flagging it again. Then it's seeing it again and it's flagging it again. And it's seeing it again, it's flagging it again. And that number keeps getting higher, which means your immune system is compromised. So even though it is a past infection number, the level matters. Same like the VCA IgG. Over 150, we're looking at a high viral load. We're looking at the potential that your body is actually continually being affected by your Epstein-Barr virus. And that is a chronic infection, not just a past infection. Now, your fourth one, the one that most doctors miss, is your early antigen. Early antigen is actually the sign if you are in a reactivated infection. So you can have a lot of symptoms. You can have a lot of issues just from the chronic infection numbers that we just talked about. But especially when the early antigen is positive, it means you are in a flare. That is a true flare of Epstein-Barr. Typically, symptoms are more magnified, you feel worse, and that is one of those values that we really want to work on getting back to normal, is the early antigen. So that tells us the difference between, do I have mono right now? Do I have a chronic infection because my VCA, IgG, and my nuclear antigen are really high? Or am I actually in a flare? Am I in an Epstein-Barr flare right now because my early antigen is also elevated? Now, with all of that together, I also want you to understand what to expect when you start working on these things. So let's say you have your labs, you find out that you have these elevated numbers. Some of these numbers will go back to normal, and some of them won't. And that's okay. That's normal. So the two that we would expect, if they are positive, we do want to see those go back into normal range, would be the IgM, right? Your actual acute infection. When the infection passes, your IgM should go back to normal. And your early antigen. Your early antigen is being in a flare. As we work on it and your body continues to get better, you'd want to see that number go back into normal range. Now, your VCA IgG and your nuclear antigen will not go back to normal range. Those are signs you've had it in the past. You're not going to erase that. They are also the numbers that have built up over time. Remember, this is your body looking at this infection and building these antibodies over and over and over again. So you also won't expect to have a huge decrease in those numbers. For example, let's say it starts at 500. You're probably not dropping from 500 to 100 And that's okay, right? That doesn't mean that you're not getting better. That is build up over time. The most important thing we want to see with those two values, right? The chronic infection values, is that they don't continue to get higher. We want them to stabilize and even drop a little bit, maybe 50 to 100 points, but stabilize means the virus doesn't continue to replicate in the cells. And that's how you minimize your risk of those chronic issues like autoimmune, fibromyalgia, dysautonomia, symptoms that come with Epstein-Barr. But sometimes people will get so disappointed when they retest their labs and the numbers of your VCA IgG and your nuclear antigen aren't significantly lower. That's not the point, right? That's not the way the body works. Those are going to stay elevated. But IgM and early antigen, we do want those to go back to normal. The chronic infection levels, we want to stabilize, have them lower a little bit, but most importantly, not continue to replicate. And we actually need all four in order to make that determination. If we don't have all four levels, if we don't know the exact numbers, it's really hard to tell you if this is just a past infection or are you in a chronic Epstein-Barr infection, and that really is the root cause of all of your mystery symptoms, which in my case, that's exactly what was happening. So I know that's a lot of information. You probably know now more than most doctors know about testing Epstein-Barr, which is wonderful. The more you understand, the better choices you can make for yourself. So compare your labs, ask for those labs to be drawn. I love just giving people the tools to be able to be their own advocate when it comes to chronic health issues. So hope you learned something.